Thank you all for joining us for Pando Days. My name is Eugene Shirley, and I'm the president of Pando Populous, an environmental and social impact accelerator based in Los Angeles County. Pando Days brings the art, design, architecture, and sustainability programs together from 10 Southland colleges and universities to help LA County implement its ambitious new sustainability plan. Now, each of the participating Pando Days institutions adopted a different goal from the county's plan and created ingenious plans of their own for implementing it. Brainstorming began in the fall of last year with project development over as many as 7 months. Make sure you go to our website, pandopopulous.com, to see all the school project descriptions and read through their presentation materials. All 10 of the premier events follow the same format, hosted by a member of the Pando Board of Directors with a summary presentation of the featured project by the team lead. Short responses and questions then follow from members of the Chief Sustainability Officer Task Force for LA County, followed in turn by a period of public Q&A. We'll close by the end of the hour. All projects are being assessed by a panel of judges based on recordings of these presentations and the supporting materials. When we come together this Saturday, July 25, for the finale, we'll hear which projects the judges believe have the greatest chance for the greatest impact for county sustainability. The Pando Days host for today is Andy Schrader. Andy is Director of Environmental Affairs, Water Policy, and Sustainability for Los Angeles City Council member Paul Koretz. Pre-politics, he had a career in the film industry with DreamWorks. You've seen him on the front lines of social and environmental impact throughout Los Angeles with a strategic view that makes Andy a really great fit for hosting today's premier event. Andy, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you, Eugene. I just want to say a big thank you to the whole Pando team for keeping these terrific Pando Days projects on track and moving their rollouts fairly seamlessly to Zoom. You know, it's amazing how fast human beings can adapt and evolve once they have proper motivation and strong science-based leadership. But then I won't get into a critique of national politics here. I want to echo what it says on the opening page of the Los Angeles Countywide Sustainability Plan that Eugene mentioned. This event and the schools involved occur on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva, Fernandino Tataviam, and Venturino Chumash people whose descendants still live here today. I also want to underline what Eugene said, that Pando Days was inspired by and with the intention to help implement the truly remarkable country-leading LA County Sustainability Plan, which was approved by the truly forward-thinking Los Angeles County Board of Commissioners. LA County's Chief Sustainability Officer, Gary Giroux, and his team pulled together a diverse and effective working group that created a plan to address not only sustainability in a county of 10 million people, but environmental justice. We cannot have one without the other, which is why it's so important to acknowledge our indigenous communities and their history on these lands. So today's project comes to us from Caltech Sustainability, entitled Innovation Engine for Sustainable Development. This project addresses the LA County plan as a whole rather than any of the goals individually, but you will see specific goals addressed as examples of how the system may be used. The project is a knowledge management and impact assessment system tailored for sustainable development. And as anyone watching this probably knows, sustainable development is in the news every single day as the world copes with climate change, biodiversity loss, conflict, and resource scarcity. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So aiming towards sustainable development, Caltech's innovation engine identifies strategic needs and opportunities, facilitates collaboration between county and municipal agencies like LA City, NGOs, and other organizations focused on developing or implementing solutions, and predicts the impact of actions we might take or even the benefits of inaction. This system is the first of its kind for use in a city or a region. I'm really excited about this project and probably why they asked me to host today. From where I sit as a policymaker in one of the most influential cities in the world, one of our main problems with the climate emergency, the toxic pollution emergency in our neighborhoods, and our accompanying ecological crisis is the high level of complexity of all the issues that we face. If we initiate a certain policy, which dominoes will unexpectedly fall? Will we have an unexpectedly negative impact on the communities of color who are already struggling from being situated beside, for instance, oil drilling sites or refineries, or in the example you're about to hear about, beside freeways? Or will we achieve our goals of climate resilience and improve environmental health? The COVID crisis has really emphasized what a complicated world we've created over centuries, but especially over the last century, with trade agreements and the like. You'd be fired as insane if you were to propose actively designing a system where, say, parts of a toy are assembled in Italy from wood harvested in and sent from Indonesia and then sent to Vietnam to be painted, all on gigantic shipping ships spewing climate emissions. But that's how our global system actually works, through lowest bidder manufacturing. And then the end user child breaks it or tires of the toy within a couple of weeks and it ends up in a landfill. So is humanity actually making the best use of its resources in that way? And there's almost no way to legislatively address that type of problem, particularly at the local level. So I'm hoping this project and the others that could follow in its wake will be able to take head on the very real challenges we face, take on the complexities, and find solutions that keep people fed and housed and engaged in meaningful work without destroying the living systems of the planet along the way. And there may be the simplest of solutions. Over the past few months, we found that the quickest way to reduce air and climate pollution is to shut down the entire planet due to a global pandemic. Of course, the externalities of doing that are the problem we need to solve for. So here with the proposed gigantic solution is the Caltech team lead, Ben Freed. Ben, take it away.
Thank you so much, Andy. That was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate those words. All right, hello everyone. I hope you're having a nice Tuesday. I'm going to share my screen here. One moment. So we have here an innovation engine for sustainable development. First off, I want to thank my advisor, John Onderdonk, and this is the project. This is the Caltech sustainability submission for these Pando days. So, what is it? Why would one need such a thing? Well, in light of the urgency and necessity to transform our world to combat the existential threat of a climate catastrophe, it's imperative that we do all we can to ensure a smooth and rapid transition to a sustainable society. With this innovation engine, one can represent dense, complex information in an accessible form. We can simulate possible futures and consequences of specific decisions, and ultimately collaborate with others in a new way that fosters true mutual understanding of what's happening in our city. The first major challenge in achieving a sustainable society is making sense of an overwhelming amount of data, as Andy was alluding to. When we consider the ripple effects and interconnections of the decisions made in our city, many of which are often overlooked, sometimes they're the externalities of our exchanges, we find ourselves in a world of uncertainty. And it's not uncommon for the general public to think that planning bodies, governments, have tools to sort out this uncertainty. Perhaps run a deep analysis of various scenarios like Batman would. It's a conception of preparedness that's familiar to us. We see it all the time in movies. But in fact, this sort of thing does exist on the scale of a building. This technology is becoming more and more common. Here we see a picture of the Red Door Cafe at Caltech. This building is equipped with a system that regulates a vast multitude of parameters within the building. It even has the capability to recommend predictive maintenance, monitor the operational status of the building's various components, keeping everything efficient and sustainable. However, nothing like this really exists on the scale of a city. Nothing is being used to monitor the efficiency and sustainability of a city, taking into account the interconnections in a holistic way. And that's really one of the deep concepts here. In reality, nothing is really siloed. So this innovation engine aims to solve that problem. Here, we have a bird's eye view of what the system design is. 3 categories. A plan is developed, the planning phase. You can see in the top right, we have plan 1, and I've put in there our county plan. The plan, hopefully, is implemented. We move to the impact phase. Impacts are assessed. We want to know how well did we achieve what we set out to do. That data is then uploaded to the back end of the model that I've developed, which is a representation of the city. Analysis using cutting-edge techniques from science that are progressing every day allows for a constant process of refinement throughout the entire process of transitioning to sustainability. In the planning diagram, you'll see that I've written the sum of all plans should aim to reach minimally adequate sustainability. Well, what does that mean? You can see, well, there's the Our County plan, and it covers a wide array of actions. Those are specific goals, specific things that are going to be carried out in the city. But in the future, as we move across the next 25 years, which the plan is set out to be implemented across, there might be new plans, there might be additions. So you have plan 2, 3, 4, 5, plan N, however many there might be. The sum of all these plans should aim to achieve a world where we don't jeopardize the future, right? Minimally adequate sustainability. Right there at that baseline. The analysis category has, like I said, cutting edge technology and tools to make sense of everything that's going on. And that analysis really measures the distance that our city or any city is from minimally adequate sustainability. It's a measure that we put on the city. So, identifying opportunities. That's one of the first, that's really one of the core concepts. So, here's some ways the system works. The first core idea is representation. We need to be able to make complex data accessible and aim to find a perspective that allows us to see aspects that we normally wouldn't be able to. If we consider the Our County plan, it's a thick document. It's roughly 250 pages. There's a lot of auxiliary information. It's something that would take a decent amount of time and a lot of effort to get through, and especially to understand in a meaningful way. Here we have an example of a representation. So what is this? The Our County plan encompasses a wide body of information. and converting it to something visually accessible allows the responsible parties to see the organization and the structure of said plan in a way that allows inquiry and planning to flourish. This picture is a representation of the goals and actions within the plan. At the top left, we have the 12 plans, and within those clusters are the actions of each goal. Moving to the second phase, we're finding the interrelations via the topic tags within the R County plan, and we're drawing interconnections between the various goals. Moving to 3, we're filtering out weak connections. That's something that we do in network science. It helps us make a little bit more sense of what's going on. And you'll notice that it goes from 12 distinct colors to 3 colors. What we've done there is identified the densest connections within that network, a community of connections, so to speak. 4 is a further filtering, getting rid of erroneous information. And 5 is a reorganization of those nodes. Again, the nodes represent the actions. So you can very clearly see in 5 communities of actions related to one another through the topic tags. Then in 6, we have the same structure that we have in 5, but we've changed the color back to the original colors. So you can see the interconnections between the goals. And they're partitioned into 3 sections, into 3 communities. Those topic tags, by the way, would be air quality, climate, economy and workforce, energy, equity, housing, land use, landscape and ecosystems, public health, resilience, transportation, waste and resource management, water, and funding and finance. So these actions aim, or rather, are operating in a partitioned focus. So what are we really doing? We're seeing around corners. We can see structure that would otherwise be near impossible to grasp by just reading the plan. We consider, the hundreds of pages of text. In this picture, we have the 6th image, the 3 communities laid out, where the color of the nodes represent the specific goal that particular action is part of. And then on the right-hand side, we have it again recolored. Each node is labeled with its specific action, and 3 communities are presented. This sort of information allows planners to immediately see opportunities for synergy. It allows for a perspective where one can say, oh, action 57 really complements action 108 in, another goal. And maybe we don't have departments working in collaboration with one another. Maybe there could be collaboration. This is part of the innovation process. So, with proper representation, we move into predicting impacts. We found a way to make all of this complex stuff visually accessible. And then on the back end of the system, all of this stuff is also being stored in a very handy form of a data set. So it's quite accessible to those who are comfortable with coding. You have all that information readily available. So we move into predicting impacts. Each decision that we make, whether it's a policy, whether it's a particular transformation of our infrastructure, could have a variety of outcomes. Outcome A, outcome B, outcome C. That's the uncertainty. We don't know. There's a probability of what outcome will happen. With the right representation, we can start to predict impact. Our representations become part of the landscape in which we simulate possible futures. So on the left-hand side here, we have an abstract representation of the R County plan, where entities being the responsible parties within the R County plan, like LA County Public Works, for example. We have the entities, the actions on the next layer, and then the impacts, all related to one another in terms of a multi-layer network. The entities are related via responsibility. The actions are related in terms of their topic tags. There are projections to impacts. Impacts are related based on information from the previous two layers. And there's hyperlayer information indicating what specific actions are entities tied to and what specific impacts are tied to which specific actions. So on the right-hand side, we have a multi-layer GIS model, GIS being Geographic Information Systems, short for that, which is fit with real-world data, painting a digital geospatial representation of the city, in which our abstraction on the left-hand side can then be integrated, and thus we have a real-world playground to explore potential policy, different economic scenarios, emergency situations, all through simulation. We can start to answer what happens if, with some certainty. We'll never have 100% certainty. That's a fundamental law of physics, but we have to live with that. City Council, this is an interesting anecdote. During this COVID pandemic, I happened to drop in for quite a few hours of the first City Council meeting on what to do in terms of emergency aid. And one thing I noticed was that a lot of decisions couldn't be made because City Council members didn't have an adequate amount of information to understand the consequences of a potential decision. You make an emergency decision and it might have outcome B when you intended it to have outcome A. So, they had to confer with their assistants, their teams, and the city waited weeks for reports to be analyzed. With a system like the innovation engine that's been fully integrated into the infrastructure of local politics, that has a robust data set behind it so that models are realistic. The potential consequences of an emergency decision could be modeled and run in practically real time. So that would be an invaluable tool for something like local politics, and especially in emergency situations. So here's an example I've prepared. I've prepared two toy models. These models represent two of the potential layers in a multi-layer model. Think back to the last page here on the right. Each layer in this GIS model is a particular set of information. Well, now we're supposing that on one of those particular layers, we're running a scenario. It's no longer a static set of information. It's now dynamic. So here we have a plot, a portion of Santa Monica. Some of you might recognize. And what this particular model is it's looking at a transition to solar energy. This is an idealized model, but what it's trying to explore is the energy availability. So with solar energy, we have to consider that when the sun goes down, we're not generating energy. That's one thing to look at. We can also look at the CO2 emissions. As we increase the number of solar panels, we would expect CO2 emissions to drop. And at the top, a simple indicator of how many solar panels versus how much fossil fuel is being used. So this this shows the potential for GIS integration into models. That is, using geospatial data as the backdrop for simulation. And again, this is just one of the potential layers that we could include in a very robust model of the city. I will play this. So a caveat, running these models on my computer is quite computationally heavy. So I wasn't able to do a lot of parameter tweaking to give a full demonstration of these. But for the next model, we've actually included that as something that you can download and play with yourself. As long as you're not trying to record it at the same time on your computer, it should run just fine. So here the model's running, and you can see that there's sort of a periodic energy availability. The CO2 emissions and the solar and fossil count aren't being varied, but the parameters are available to vary. What is being varied is weather interference. So, and also the efficiency of solar panels. So you can see that the graph is slightly increasing over time. And there it drops with a thick, heavy line indicating, well, okay, maybe there's some cloud coverage. This is just a toy model. We could start to include aspects of cost. We can start to include a whole vast array of particular parameters that we'd want to look at. And again, this constitutes just one layer of a robust model that we could then use to look at many different scenarios in the city. Here's my next example. It's a toy example inspired by the first action of the R County Plan, which looks to limit zoning of sensitive buildings, housing, nursing homes, schools, essentially anywhere where people spend a lot of time, to move them away from freeways, because elongated exposure to the fumes coming out of cars has been shown to cause an array of health problems, long-term health problems. So there's some assumptions in this model. There's one assumption that the citizens are aware that living next to freeways is not good, and they have a desire to move away from freeways. But what we're really looking at here, the two important parameters, the first one would be the income to rent ratio. So for each green and brown square that you see, that's a potential residency. Think of brown as less habitable, green as more habitable. As development in a neighborhood takes place, you could have random development, meaning any one of the plots is equally likely to be developed as a habitable living space. And as the agents move around, they're going to try to move to the best possible scenario for them, but they're going to be limited by their income. You can also toggle this switch, which you'll see in the model, that allows you to turn off a random build versus smart build. Smart build being an indication that there's perhaps a policy put in place that regulates zoning to, or regulates the development of new buildings to the maximum distance possible away from a freeway. And the graph that you're going to want to look at here is people more than 1,500 feet away. As I play the model, here we go. You can see blue vertical lines in the people more than 1,500 feet away time series graph. What those blue lines represent are 1 year of time. The question being, how long is it going to take for a population to have 50% at least 1,500 feet away? In this particular test case in my toy model, it takes roughly 5 years. As you bring down the income to rent ratio, it takes much longer. Less income, higher rent. People don't have the chance to move. As you bring the income rent ratio higher, people have more income, and the time it takes for a society or for a square block in a city to transition away from freeways takes a lot less time. Again, this is one layer that we could explore. And this is a toy model. This could be data fit over, say, a GIS, geospatial information, fit with real world data, made to be incredibly realistic and represent realistic figures. So, with the ability to represent complex information in an accessible form, with the power of simulation, forecasting, multi-layer network analysis, we move to a new paradigm in collaboration. With these tools, we make we can make real-time adjustments to planning and bolster collaboration between disciplines, between departments, between expertise. So it's really fostering a culture of knowledge sharing and expertise sharing. This is one example right here. So on the left-hand side, you see a network that represents the shared responsibilities within the our county plan of the various entities, that is the departments directly responsible for carrying out the actions in the our county plan. The thickness of the line between the nodes represents the amount of shared responsibility, and the size of the node represents their individual responsibility. So that's a visualization. But on the right-hand side, we have a typical measure, one of the most ubiquitous measures that you'll find in network science, the degree distribution. And what is that telling us? Along the bottom, it's telling us how many connections are there on a particular node. And on the vertical dimension, it's saying how many nodes have that amount of connections. And you can see that in this particular graph, it sort of starts at the top left and then has a trend of moving down and to the right. So sort of making a cusp. This immediately gives you an idea of the distribution of responsibility. Los Angeles County Public Works has roughly 60 connections to other agencies in relation to carrying out actions. So what can we do here with multi-layer analysis? Well, one thing that we can do is look at the carrying capacity of each department and ask, okay, is this distribution of responsibility realistic? We could say, how many people are in this department? What are they expected to do over their time scale? Can we actually make this feasible? This is opening up a way of looking at planning, a way of looking at implementation of planning that I think is going to be really crucial to get a plan like the Our County Plan completed in its fullest over 25 years. So what have we seen? What are the main concepts here? Represent, taking complex information, making it accessible, understandable, visualizing it, looking at information from a new perspective, from a holistic perspective, taking that information, using it to simulate, using it to build real-world models, real-world laboratories, digital laboratories that we can then run experiments on. We could look for real-time solutions, or we could do research. We could stay ahead of the curve. We can assess impacts. Not only can we forecast, but we can quantify these forecasts. And ultimately it leads to a new paradigm of collaboration, because it opens up the playing field for everyone who's involved in the process of transforming the city, to have a common language, a common set of knowledge, which will hopefully dissolve, the archetypal situation of two municipal departments working on pretty much the same thing, but Team A has never spoken to Team B, and Team B has never spoken to Team A, and they really have no idea what each other are doing. But they'd be a lot better off together, but they aren't, and, that sort of thing. So what are the next steps? Well, the next steps, establish a lab. There's a lot of back-end work to be done. The system in its analytical framework is built, but taking that data from the environment and integrating it into databases and building out the first large-scale models that we can run simulations over is the purpose of establishing a lab. A client, or really a first large-scale test case, and then ultimately a software package. Now, the software package would be something ideally that's publicly available. This information is not only valuable to city planners, to policymakers, to the parties directly responsible, but this could open up a new paradigm of civic engagement, excuse me, from the ordinary citizen who really doesn't have an accessible way of understanding what's going on in their city, because information is, at this level of complexity, is practically impossible to acquire, and to understand is even a larger feat. So what does that do? That sort of ushers in a sense of a new tool for the public to hold elected officials, public servants accountable, because all of a sudden information about what's happening in the city is readily available. There's a new form of education in town, so to speak. Thank you very much.
We'll turn it over to you, John.
Thank you. Well done, Ben. Congratulations on the presentation. Very well done. I think the couple of takeaways, we'll get into the Q&A here in a second, but I just wanted to espouse for a little bit. One of the things that attracted me to Ben's idea and concept when we first started talking about it was the analysis of complexity. I think all of us who are practitioners in sustainability and are trying to make change understand intuitively that sustainability is about complexity, and sustainability is about finding solutions to these very complex and amorphous challenges, right? And we've all heard the John Muir quote, right? If you try and pull on anything in particular, you find that it's hitched to everything else in the universe. We sort of understand these connections intuitively, but we all struggle, I think, in a way to visualize that, articulate that, and communicate that in a way to identify solutions. And I think what Ben is working on here and has created is a very powerful tool to help that visualization, particularly for folks who may be new to sustainability or aren't as versed as many of us are in the field, to see those connections and see it in a network way that automatically communicates, the interconnectedness and the opportunities is really powerful. And then I think the flip side of that is that it creates a massive opportunity for professionals, whether they're in sustainability or politics or planning, whatever they may be. But if we're all trying to work toward a goal of a better future, this is a tool that allows people to essentially iterate much faster than they could in the real world, play with options, right? See how things work, find those unintended consequences, which are so important in complex systems, and really trying to make much better, more educated, educated guesses really about the future. So those were the two things that really stood out for me when Ben and I started talking about this project. And I hope you see those benefits for yourself. So anyway, congratulations, Ben. I think it was a solid presentation, and looking forward to continuing the work. I mean, obviously this is the tip of the iceberg, hopefully, for very cool stuff as we go forward. So I think now we can open it up to questions. There are a couple of questions that were posted on the chat.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
And Ben, that was terrific. I just wanted to seize it over before we go astray. I just want to flag we're probably going to go a bit longer than 2 p.m., but I thought this project needed a little more detailed explanation. So now we're so pleased to be joined today by 4 members of Pando Populous's Chief Sustainability Officer Task Force, who will be offering short assessments of the initiative and asking 1 or 2 questions each. And no pressure, but this is such an impressive panel that I'm expecting really, truly outstanding feedback. And after the CSOs have responded, we'll open it up for the public Q&A. So first up today to comment is Chris Ree, who's an urban planner and sustainability strategist from Burrow Happold, which is an interdisciplinary engineering firm. And Chris also just happens to have been a key architect of the remarkable LA County Sustainability Plan. Chris.
All right, thanks very much, and thanks, Ben, for your presentation. I'm going to be delivering some, I think, constructive commentary here, and I just want to sort of preface this in saying that the aim here is really to strengthen the project and provide some learning moving forward. I'm going to break up my comments into 2 areas, one on the multi-layered network analysis and the other on the agent-based toy models. For the network analysis, it was definitely cool to see the interrelated nature of the implementing agencies and actions and topics. I think at one point you said it's easy to see the relationships between, but I actually found that the visuals weren't actually that easy to see. I couldn't read the labels, for instance, on each of the nodes. So I'd like to see it a little bit more polished and packaged so that it is usable. And the question is, how would it be received by folks working at public agencies, and what needs and opportunities is it actually addressing? Because I think we all knew beforehand that public works was going to be the most important node here. So what new information and knowledge does it provide? Another small comment was that I found the statement minimally adequate sustainability a little sad, to be honest. I would hope that we are striving for more than sort of the minimum viable product, and really striving for a vision that's more regenerative and thinking about a future that's more than just the bare minimum. On the agent-based toy models, I think that this approach could have used it could have used additional perspectives from sociologists and urban planners and urban historians and scholars of American studies. What you pointed out in the first part was that there's too much siloed decision-making and thinking going on. And I think actually was the problem here, because if you spoke to any of these professionals or students, they would tell you about the problem and legacy of rational planning that led to all kinds of adverse outcomes from the urban renewal movement of the 1960s, which led to slum clearance programs and highway construction. There's also scenario planning software that's already commercially available from Esri, the creators of GIS. There are open source models such as Community Viz and several other software packages that are available, and this is being used in practice today to simulate outcomes of future development models and sort of understand the impacts of comprehensive plans. I think it's also important to clearly state the limitations of using agent-based models, which assume perfect information, 100% mobility, and rational behavior, none of which actually occurs in real life. So I offer that as what I'm seeing and reflecting upon from being a professional urban planner in practice. I think the toy models, it seemed like there were these two ideas here, and I think the nodal visualization is probably the stronger one, and would encourage that one to be developed further, but would ask how you see this being used by practitioners in a practical manner.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now, next up, we have Dean Kubani, who is kind of the trailblazing Chief Sustainability Officer for the city of Santa Monica. He's been working at this for a while, and really he's been a key figure in establishing the sustainability field at the municipality level. So Dean, take it away.
All right, thank you, Andy, and thank you, Benjamin, for a great presentation. I find your project really interesting, and I think you really hit the nail on the head with the problem of achieving sustainability, or one of the main problems lies in its complexity and the fact that everything is connected, and how do you get everybody moving in the right direction. So I love the thought that went into the idea that you're teasing out here. It definitely, and I can tell you from a practitioner's standpoint, that problem definitely needs to be solved, because you're constantly running into siloed thinking. I found my job was trying to do what I think computer models are ultimately trying to do, which is bring people together from different disciplines and come up with much better decisions that result in much better outcomes than our typical decisions that we've been making, in the imperfect way we've been making them for decades and decades. So I really like the idea, and I'd love to see you develop it more. I do agree with Chris that some constructive criticism is warranted. The main thing, and this is coming from me, who is very new to network science, I don't know much about it. I read through your description of the project, and I found it pretty difficult to understand for a reasonably intelligent person, me. So what I would challenge you to do is take a lot of the work that you've done and be able to describe this project to a layperson in a very simple and clear way who knows nothing about it. You mentioned that it provides a visualization that gives a very easy understanding of the county plan. In looking at the visualization tools that you showed me so far, I didn't really get that, but teasing that out to show how the interconnections work. What are some interconnections that you identified that somebody reading the plan wouldn't really pull out? So that's kind of my challenge to you, is to try and make this really understandable to the layperson, because I found in my job that was one of the main things that I had to do. My clients were typically elected officials who had very little time and no interest in reading or understanding. They wanted the 30-second summary of what is this thing and why am I spending $7 million on it, or whatever it is. So in order to get the lab that you're looking for and to get to the software that you want, you're going to need to be able to sell this to practitioners. I mean, I have lots of questions, and I would love to sit down and talk to you about this in detail. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but probably my first question is how difficult and expensive would it be to build out this to address the entire plan? Do you have any idea of that scale?
Should I respond now or later? I'll go now. A price. That actually hasn't been something that I've thought a lot about, but off the top of my head, it wouldn't be something that's outrageously expensive, especially for a smaller city like Santa Monica, for instance. Essentially, I suppose the primary cost that would be the employment of a small group of people and computer hardware.
Would a follow-up to that, one of the problems that we've always had, and I know most other cities have, is data collection, and it's tends to be expensive to collect it, and it's also difficult to get good quality data. And it seems like your models would, I mean, the outputs are really as good as what you put into it. And we have a lot of great GIS systems and all sorts of other systems already at the city, and we find that we don't have the money to go out and get the data that we actually need to crunch the numbers to make the decisions. So is that would that be a similar issue here?
To an extent, but there's a range of techniques in order to address that. So within an agent-based model, one of the things that you can do is parameter sweeps. So if you have a rough idea of statistically what's happening on a particular, with a particular phenomenon, what you can do is essentially, it's referred to as just black boxing it, and you make it a statistical output of what those values pretty much are. And then if you need to vary them within a range, you can come up with a reasonable variance, so to speak. Ideally, I would say that there's a larger discussion here about prioritizing data collection in terms of sustainable, sustainable measures that we want to be keeping close track on. I mean, that's something that's also very important that we need to be doing. But agent-based models can do a pretty good job of a statistical analysis if there's enough literature, I suppose, to explain what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And Andy, can I ask one quick last question? Who do you see as the kind of end user of this system? Would this be somebody like a chief sustainability officer and that person's staff? Would it be the general public? I mean, who would ultimately be using this? And actually operating the software, or is it like a consultant would come in, you would come in and do it for me?
I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the really nice thing about a lot of agent-based models is that the constructing them might have a higher bar, but utilizing them, which is, if you mess with the one that I included in the deliverables, you'll see that the bar to entry in terms of actually using it as a little laboratory is very low. It's very intuitive. It's like a control board, sliders, for particular parameters that you want to set. You know, you want to set the income rent ratio a little higher, you move it. It's quite straightforward. So it's actually something that I think with quite minimal training, pretty much anyone can get the grasp of using. And if it's built correctly, you get immediate understanding of what a particular decision or policy might be in the future, what the impacts might be. So yeah, in the ideal sense, you wouldn't need a consultant. You would have experts building them, but the tool would be usable for everyone.
Hey Ben, so I didn't mean to bleep over Chris's your response to Chris, which I did. I'm trying to keep track of time, and we're almost at 2 o'clock right now. So if you want to answer one of Chris's questions quickly, and then we'll move to our other CSOs.
Right. So I think a common question, a common criticism was the visualizations are not necessarily easy to understand. And I suppose that for me is something that I'm just very comfortable with them. So maybe I have a bias in terms of, or, you know, I'm just familiar with them. I've worked with them for a long time. So to me, it's very intuitive. Again, I think that with a little detailed explanation of how exactly these things are constructed and what they're representing, the visualizations are nice to sort of just look at, glance, get a general idea for what's going on. The really powerful aspect is not the visualization of the network. It's the matrix of the network. It's on the back end. It's that those structures that are represented in the visualization are integrated into a simulation. Those connections are accounted for. That's really what's happening with this network analysis. So if you wanted to run a simulation, for instance, it would automatically calculate the weights, let's say, of responsibility in terms of who's working on what. You could include economic factors of what the financial distribution might look like on top of that. There are definitely pitfalls, or not pitfalls, but limitations to agent-based modeling. The ideal range of agents being, so agent-based modeling is really about a heterogeneous system opposed to a homogeneous system. So components that have unique properties and unique interactions that are individualized. So it's bottom-up modeling. Another phrase is generative modeling. And it's actually made incredible advancements in the past decade. The rational actor, for instance, is something that's been addressed. There are cognitive models now that are actually informed by neuroscience. It starts with the actual tissue science, looking at function of the amygdala up through cognitive neuroscience and experimental psychology, and using models from experimental psychology to then build an emotional module into these agents and build a model of reason. And it's noted in the literature that, you know, they actually sometimes have to bump up the reasoning weight in these agents because you know, to get like idealized situations, because if they made a correct proportion of reason to emotion in actual human behavior, you know, sometimes you would have to run the models a little bit longer to see the same things. So, you know, reason is this slave to emotion, as Hume said. So things like the rational agent have been worked out, and the power of agent-based modeling, to what Chris was implying, is really that it's an interdisciplinary framework in order, it allows for one to take insights from the social sciences, from history, from the natural sciences, and incorporate it all into one model. And that's something that would be done in the lab setting. But I agree with you that collaboration is essential.
Okay, next I want to get to Luis Navarro, who's with Langen Engineering and Environmental Sciences, where he provides solutions to clients' environmental, geotechnical, and engineering challenges. Luis.
Great, thank you. And Benjamin, let me start off with congratulating you for what is really an ambitious project. This one, what I really do like about it is that it's a solution to try and evaluate the consequences of different actions, and then also prioritize different initiatives that can be undertaken. A key problem with sustainability that a lot of different entities face is materiality. What's significant, what isn't, to make sure that the decisions you're making and the investments you're making are appropriate to have the greatest impact. I know that there's been a couple of questions already kind of related to this, but I wanted just to talk about the part of calibration, because you are doing a predictive model. And then there is probability analysis, which I understand in age-based modeling starts off really with the Monte Carlo simulation, which introduces the randomness. But as this model is used, there's going to be the generation of a lot of information as you compare its predicted results to actual results as they occur. Have you thought about, is this going to be machine learning? Is it going to have AI component where it can take the ultimate results and evaluate the different assumptions, and instead of using random models going forward, start to correct for clear trends or bias that is detecting as it looks at what it predicted and what actually occurred. So I think that's going to be part of what's powerful about this. You're introducing a seedling, and I think that's some of the first comments that you heard is, you know, the data set's not there. There's still robust data, and absolutely. And me as a geologist, I've gotten used to having to work with very limited data sets and evaluate and come up with initial theories, and then build upon that as you get more and more data in there. So I think if you look at your calibration, ways to create machine learning, it can start to help to solve some of the issues that were introduced with some of the previous questions. So that was one of my comments, kind of questions. And then finally, without taking up too much more time, can it assess the impact? We had a bit of a conversation on this when we met a couple of months ago, but the impact of education and participants, we talked about acting logically, but the desire to act in accordance with sustainable practices. As we know, there is a set of the population that either doesn't have the education or the knowledge to contribute towards sustainability initiatives, and public participation is going to be key to driving any successful sustainable initiative. And then there's some that have decided not to participate in that. Is there a way for the model to contemplate those aspects? Thanks.
So I'll be quick in addressing both questions there. So to the first part, using AI is definitely something that we would want to do. There's a nice feature in the NetLogo space called behavior space. It's a parameter sweeping function. Using AI to bolster that and compare it to actual data would be a way to hone in on not essentially you're sweeping a subspace of the parameter space with AI. That's the hope. So it would make models faster. Large models on the scale of 10 million agents might take 2 days or something, 3 days to fully run. So yeah, AI would be useful in that, definitely. In terms of the lack of actual data, that gets back to the to Dean's point and the thing I was talking about with Dean, that's a larger discussion of government prioritizing data collection on important measures. There's some very interesting papers within agent-based modeling that ask the question, is data fitting even important? And there's an argument to be made that if you understand enough of the underlying principles of, that is, the simple governing rules that would generate the phenomenon in the first place, that if you have any sort of historical record, you can sort of get it to work pretty well. But yeah, the data collection thing is, that's going to be an issue, I think, for anyone trying to work in this space. Okay, the second part, the education part. Yeah, so with agent-based modeling, again, the accessibility of using the model is something that is a great educational tool within itself. I mean, that's something that I personally believe should be integrated into our education system. As computer science is becoming more and more integrated, agent-based modeling should also become more and more integrated, because it doesn't just address these problems, it addresses a vast array of, I mean, you can make models of physical phenomena, you can make geological models, you can make all sorts of different models, and using that as an educational tool in of itself is something that I think is important. In terms of engaging individuals, I do think that there is something to say about creating a movie visualization of what might happen when you go with policy A versus policy B. And videos like that exist. There are some fantastic renderings actually in the realm of crisis management coming out of NYU, particularly in Los Angeles, where there's a plume of smoke in the middle of downtown, and it's an agent-based model of traffic. What does traffic look like in that scenario? Okay, so that's, you know, not necessarily in the realm of sustainability, but it could be in terms of the animation. That could be something that's very powerful for engaging individuals. Now, when it comes in the realm of science, it's always been the case that you know, you get to decide how you want to use the tool. So, in terms of making good decisions, you know, I think that this framework is very powerful. So, if people want to cut fossil fuels and you know, want to avoid essentially take the lessons from history seriously, then this tool provides a framework, I believe, to quantify ways to do that. I guess that's one of the points here, that what do these interconnections mean? There's quantifiable measures that mean something. They go along with all this stuff. So.
Okay, thank you, Luis. And I just do want to acknowledge to everybody who's watching that that we've gone past our 2 o'clock time, and we're going to go a little bit longer. I think this is a really interesting conversation. So so if you have to go, we apologize, and I think we'll have the video up on the Pando Populous website for you to check out if you want to catch up. So so next up, Disney has been a really forward-thinking company in terms of sustainability, and there's a reason, And his name is Mark Spears, who is the founding chief sustainability officer of Disney. He's now retired, but to me, as far as I can tell, that doesn't mean that he's slowed down at all. He's a founding member of the CSO task force. Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Andy. And I'm actually going to speed up my comments and questions here to allow for the public Q&A. A couple things, a lot, Ben, to like about the approach, certainly the concept. And John, I want to acknowledge you as well. Clearly bringing science to the table to tie back to the old frustration that Andy offered up early. The notion of correlation, which I think as Dean alluded to, is something that has been very difficult to manage at scale for those of us involved in this work. And the last aspect, I think that, certainly another value that it offers is the notion of resiliency. And Ben, you used the example of the city council decision-making process related to COVID-19 and funding of different efforts and actions. The question that I have, the broad theme will be integrity and governance, has to do with the actual model itself and the notion of a peer review to understand the approach and ensuring the consistency of application. So thinking more about the establishment of the model and its recognition and acceptance within the community. The second part would be on the ongoing maintenance, and bear with me, again, not a little bit outside of my expertise, but the ability to manage essentially the code or the programming or the infrastructure of this as it's released out into the wild to ensure that we are maintaining certainly both the integrity of its intent as well as minimizing any built-in bias that may find its way into the model over time. Have there been any kinds of discussions about how that might work as this project moves forward?
I will start with the peer review. I think that's a great point. So the validity of these models and the public acceptance of these models is something that is of utmost importance. I personally love the idea of a public board of review of qualified individuals. I think that's I think that should be around for a lot of things, but yeah, that would definitely be something that that we would want to include. No doubt about that. In terms of managing the code, there's a couple ways to think about this. One way we could do it is you have verified data. So verified data would be data that's peer reviewed. And if you wanted to make the platform open source, you could have people upload data, but it wouldn't necessarily be verified data. So the validity of an outcome wouldn't necessarily be, wouldn't have that stamp of peer-reviewed approval if, you know, it wasn't data that had been understood to be, to represent reality. Avoiding bias in data is a problem throughout computer science. That's something that everyone is dealing with because our data reflects our society. And so that's a conversation that we would have to pay very close attention to. Did I answer?
You did. I actually just to reinforce though, when we think about open source or what have you, if the value of this, and let's just stick with LA County as the territory and perhaps cities and unincorporated areas are the prospective customers or universities or what have you, are the customers or clients, it strikes me that there does need to be some kind of control about the model going out, because presumably we want to see data collection coming from each of these sources and being able to link it and gather it and analyze it in a way that's consistent so that we best understand what the impacts are and what the implications for say, future actions? That's a question, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there would absolutely be a, you know, I think that it would be nice to have this platform available to everyone, but again, there would be like a verified stamp, you know, this is an official model endorsed by the project that's been peer reviewed, and you know, if you want to try to cook up your own thing and get it peer reviewed, then that's also great. You know, I think that invites innovation and people to get involved. So,
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now we want to go to Adam Ewens, who's been the curator of Pando Days. He's going to pick his favorite public question. Maybe I shouldn't frame it that way. He's going to pick a public question, and then we'll wrap up. On to you, Adam.
Thank you, Andy. Ben, just shortly, you know, thank you for your masterclass just now, and I'm just very grateful that you haven't chosen to use your master's in computer science for a six-figure salary at one of the 4 big data companies that will have you predict when I will buy my next toaster, but that you're instead trying to build this Tower of Babel for us. I have a question that you might want to read along in the chat box by Professor Heather Barker of Cal State Pomona. She asks, what is the data analyzed to define the connections? Is it semantic analysis from the plan itself? There are 3 distinct areas visualized with clearly separated areas. Is there any data to support bridges between these areas? And then from the degree distribution diagram representing the capacity of each department, we see that goal 7 has 0 points mapped. Goals 9, 5, and have 1. Can this visualization be read as priority areas for the county city? And if so, can we assign the accountability for these goals to outside orgs in order to meet the goals more quickly? Over to you, Ben.
We see that goal 7 has 0 points mapped. Oh, okay. I see what a little bit of confusion in reading the graph. On the vertical axis, that indicates how many agencies have that particular connection. So there's no number of connections where 7 agencies have that number of connections. On the bottom, the value is the number of connections that a particular entity has. So does that might clear that? If you want to ask me about the graph, I'm happy to go through it again. In terms of the data analyzed, okay, so yeah, it's a semantic analysis. The data is pulled directly from the R County plan. So it's if you read the plan, there's the primary entity, and then there's the partners. The connections for each action when we're looking at nodes that pertain to entities, the connections between the nodes represent that those 2 entities are working on the same project. So there's shared responsibility between those 2 agencies. And we can quantify that. So that's something that instead of looking at heuristic data, you know, like, oh, they're working together, but how much are they working together? I mean, you can literally get as detailed as you want. You can say, there's this many people in that department. This is what they've been assigned to do in terms of, you know, their responsibilities. This is how much money they have. This is how much money's been allocated. In network science, and this addresses some other questions, something that Mark briefly brought up in terms of resilience and robustness. One of the things that we like to look at in complex system science is systemic risk analysis, which asks the question, if one department doesn't do what they need to do, what's the fallout in the larger network? This is used for analyzing financial systems. And it's sort of actually revolutionized the analysis of systemic risk in financial systems. So yeah, the data is semantic, and then the hyperdata in between those layers represents, so you have the entities, you have the shared relationships between the entities, and then you have the entities mapped directly to which actions they're working on. So now you have not only the shared responsibility, but you also have the, what are they working on? And then the actions are related through their topic tags. So that's another layer of information. And then the impacts are an abstract projection because they haven't been measured yet. But the relationships between the impacts relate back to how they're connected to the actions. So there is some embedded information in that graph concerning the last layer.
Okay, well, I think we need to wrap up. So thank you, Adam, and we'll make sure that Ben has provided the other questions that were asked to think about as he revises his project. I love this concept. Ben talked about being able to address emergencies in real time. This would have been so useful in the past 5 months when we've had not just one but two major emergencies with all the externalities related to them. I'm here to tell you it's tough to keep a city of 4 million people safe, especially during a global pandemic, especially with massive protests going on simultaneously. When I heard about the comet Neowise this week, I figured it was headed right toward us. So we at the city look forward to having this at our fingertips. Big thank yous to Caltech Sustainability, to Ben Freed, and to your advisor, John Underdock, the Chief Sustainability Officer at Caltech. And I look forward to seeing what comes next for this project. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Eugene for the wrap-up.
Okay, thank you so much, Andy, for hosting this event. Again, many thanks to Ben and to John Underdock, Head of Sustainability at Caltech, for developing such a fascinating initiative. Everyone, please remember you can see all of this presentation on our website, pandopopulous.com. A recording will be up by tonight. Many thanks to the members of the CSO task force who responded today: Chris Ree, Dean Kubani, Luis Navarro, and Mark Spears. Many thanks to the Pando Days curator, Adam Ewens, festival producer, Shelley Goldstein, producer, Betsy Hunter, and presentation consultant, Judith Parker. Pando Days was conceived with the help of the CSO Strategic Task Force and made possible by the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, Second Home, the Mary Knowles Sisters, and many others. Make sure to join us this Saturday at 2 p.m. for the Pando Days finale. Here you'll find out the decisions of the Pando Days judges and learn which projects they believe are best prepared to move ahead and make the impact in the county we need. It's the conclusion to all you've seen over the past 5 weeks of Pando Days presentations. You won't want to miss it. Go to our website to register. Thank you again for joining us. See you this Saturday at 2, and have a great afternoon.